morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's a great delight to be here again. I'll remind you, my name is Katherine, Bishop Katherine, and I'm the interim bishop here until you elect another bishop. We hope that's going to be in February, and that bishop will be ordained and installed in the middle of June, and I expect to be with you until that time. So I look forward to getting to know all of you much better. Trust. What does trust mean to you? We started today by praying that we might always be able to put our full trust in God. But what does that look like? Trust. The ancient roots of that word lie in a language that was spoken in Eurasia 4,000 years before Jesus. It's a language that gave rise eventually to European tongues like Latin and Greek, and eventually English, as well as the Sanskrit of India. That root meant to be firm, or solid, or steadfast. And it gave rise to words as varied as tree, and truth, and durable, and that old word, troth. A tree is solid and durable, and in some sense dependable while it lives. The marriage vows in the old prayer book said, "I plight thee my troth," meaning I promise to be true or faithful. One of life's biggest questions is where we put our trust. What or who can we count on when the going gets tough? Who or what merits our trust? That old-fashioned word, troth, is about pledging your trust for life. A betrothal bestows trust in another person. We may not do it perfectly, but the promise that two people are going to share their lives through sickness and want, as well as in health and plenty, is a remarkable act of confidence in another human being. In some sense, that promise can expand the trustworthiness of the partners. The act of speaking that vow increases both the desire to be true and the power to accomplish it. People often discover that they live up to that expectation and even beyond it. Trust is ultimately about truth and fidelity. I want to tell you the story of a rather remarkable African-American woman who was the child of a former slave and a Jewish father whom she never met. Born in Kansas in 1870. Her mother had no formal education, but May got 5 years of grade school and a few months of secretarial training. Before she was 21, she decided to change her name. And in those days, you had to petition the state legislature to pass a law permitting it. She changed her name to May DeConza. That last name is her claim to be of the prairie, or of Kansas. May DeConza became a remarkable correspondent with Henry Ford, with W.E.B. Du Bois, with the bishops of Kansas, and with government officials. She was a creative thinker, a pianist, a composer, a dreamer, and a writer. She joined the Episcopal Church in Clay Center, Kansas, and was confirmed by the bishop in 1900. She was the only African-American member of that congregation throughout its history, and she remained active there until she died in 1959. To the end of her life, the vestry insisted that she use a separate chalice, reserved only for her. She complained repeatedly to the Bishop of Kansas about being ignored and excluded and disregarded, And in spite of precious little compassion from that congregation, she stayed. She trusted in God and in Jesus' example, and demonstrated a relentless yet often dampened hope that ultimately God would right the wrongs that she knew so well. Her story has been told by a historian who moved to Clay Center long after she died. It was published last year. His research not only opened a window on the plight of a poor, disabled African-American woman with a very creative mind and pen, but prompted the current congregation to mark her grave and to begin to learn more about her part in their story. The book is called, "Have You Seen My Spirit?" Hers was the kind of indomitable spirit that we just prayed for. To trust with all our hearts that God will never forsake anyone who pledges troth or fidelity in relationship. The readings we heard this morning are about that kind of faithfulness. Our faith wavers. We're human beings. But God's faithfulness never does. Isaiah challenges his fearful hearers to stand firm and to trust in God, who will come and save them. In God's renewed creation, the blind will see, the lame will leap for joy, and water will flow even in the desert. The psalmist says something much the same. Praise God, not earthly rulers, for only God is ultimately trustworthy, bringing justice to all creation. Food for the hungry, freedom to addicts and prisoners, healing for the blind and sick. God will level the playing field. God will thwart all kinds of theft and wickedness and oppression. That's what we're praying for in that prayer that Jesus taught us. That God's reign will become reality here on earth. That all people will receive enough to eat. That all debts will be forgiven. And that's a more accurate translation than trespasses. It's about economic justice. That's where the Jesus road is going. That's why we come together here week by week and year by year to deepen our trust in that dream of God's and to work to make it a reality. The letter of James confronts our shared human tendency to trust in other things. He's pretty direct. He says, well, if you're playing favorites, how can you be trusting God? When you treat the rich with favor and push the poor aside, are you really loving your neighbor as yourself? That problem is not extinct. Most of us find it challenging to see every single person we meet as a beloved child of God. It's not the poor who yell NIMBY, not in my backyard, in the face of affordable housing initiatives. The passage we heard this morning closes with a zinger. Trust by itself, without action, is dead on arrival, says James. Jesus himself in this gospel gets caught up in the question of favoritism. A Gentile foreigner hears Jesus is in the neighborhood and begs him to heal her daughter. He brushes her off, saying that his primary task is to feed his own Jewish people, not the dogs. It's at least dismissive and xenophobic, but she responds with some barbed humor. Well, sir, even the puppies under the table get to collect the crumbs. He receives her challenge and responds to her trust and insight by healing her daughter. His vision of his own vocation has been expanded. In the next scene in the gospel, Jesus deliberately goes into Gentile territory. The Decapolis is a group of 10 cities that mostly are Greek. And a deaf man who can't hear and can't speak clearly is brought to him to be healed. He touches the man and says, "Ephphatha," be opened in Aramaic. And immediately the man's hearing and speech are restored. Isn't that what we really seek? To be opened? Open to hope that doesn't quite seem possible? Open to trusting in the ultimate reality of what hasn't yet arrived? Open to seeing the image of God in somebody who voted differently in the last election? Open to a world where we don't have to compete for the basic stuff of life, but one where we work together to see that everybody is fed and housed? Trust is often motivated by compassion, which is literally a willingness to suffer something of what we see happening to our neighbors. May de Conza suffered a lot of small behavior from her congregation. But her ultimate trust was in something and someone bigger. Jesus suffered the indignity of being corrected or caught short by a foreign woman, and he opened himself to a larger mission. The next time we're faced with an insult or a demand or a tug on our heartstrings, can we pause and look for some tiny glimpse of the face of God? Have compassion on us, O Lord, and help us to feel compassion that will open our hearts and our ears and our hands to respond with bread and kindness and healing. Help our trust to be firmly in you, each moment and each day, that your kingdom will come on earth as it is in heaven.